Hi everyone, this is Ashish, and today we are going to discuss about Azure Verified Module. And Azure Verified Module is a project by Microsoft, and currently it's being supported for Azure Bicep and Terraform. And it's one of the very useful thing for if you're using infrastructure as code using any of these tools. And then of course, uh, as per Microsoft so far, they are not just developing this framework for these two tools, but they might come up with some other alternate options as well. But yes, I mean, so at this moment, these are the two tools which are being supported for Azure Verified Module. We will get into the details, how exactly you use it, how it's solving the problem. But before we get into the deep dive details of Azure Verified Module, but let's try to understand what the problem currently we have, and that Azure Verified Module is trying to solve. So let me share my screen. Yeah. So Azure Verified Module is solving a problem of infrastructure as code, uh, you know, reusability. So infrastructure as code, as you know, usually when we try to develop infrastructure as code for any of the deployment, uh, we first have to think about the best practices. So different teams works in different ways, and they have to, but still they have to kind of get something which is very secure, uh, following the best practices as per Microsoft and those things. So for example, it follows well architected framework. It does have all the necessary guardrails regarding security, regarding other best practices of cloud native architecture. And when we do this, or anyone who try to deploy a kind of a services, uh, they they will have to go in a process where they will come up with some code. So for example, if you are deploying a virtual machine, uh, you just don't need a virtual machine. Essentially, you need OS disk that must follow some best practices. Similarly, you need a VNet possibly, or connect a NIC card which is having a connection in the VNet. Maybe if you're creating VNet, you need subnets. Yeah, uh, you may need some kind of a some kind of a private endpoint if you are connecting with some services, some PaaS services like Azure SQL, and so on and so forth. So you will try to architect, or you will try to configure these different resources in Azure while configuring them by following the well architected framework. Now the problem is that when you create a configuration, maybe using Bicep or Terraform, yeah, you might have sometime what happens is that you might come across some modules or some code infrastructure as code in the yeah so infrastructure as code in the Git repo, either internally or externally, which combines all these things in a particular way. And then you refer this Git repo, you get your set of code, and then you deploy it to Azure. Now the the problem here is that this code that you took from Git repository, either someone has posted it on the GitHub repository, or you might have an internal repository from where you took it. Over a period of time, this particular module, you can call it, or a template, you can call it, changes over a period of time, and sometimes it happens that it just stays there. No one is maintaining it as well. So it is not a very trusted source of truth for to be able to say that you will always have up to date this module, you can say, or a template, you can say. So this problem is something that that you always come across, and you might come up, you might have either only two options. Either you take a module that you don't trust, that will be maintained in future, that will have all the best practices from well architected framework, that will have all the different things that you must have in your architecture, or you deploy or you create things from scratch. Now, when you create things from scratch, then again, you don't do the reusability aspect of infrastructure as code, and then you end up reinventing the wheel in some way. Like, either someone is already doing things in your organization in respect to virtual machine deployment, but because it is not maintained, or they might not have created a module or something that can be used, that can have a contribution or something like that, then you don't really trust on that particular reusable module or a package or whatever you can say. But you, rather than you keep developing infrastructure as code from the scratch, and you end up with different modules or different snippet of code doing the same thing, but in multiple ways, or in having a different opinionated approaches in the same organization, and that ends up organization having different issues. So for example, they might not have the same way of deploying VM for one product, and they might have another way of deploying the VM stack for another product in the same organization, or even not in the same organization, but different organizations are having their own approach of developing or deploying the same stack over Azure, which might be compliant with the well architected framework of Azure, or which might have slight variation of it. But this is a kind of a problem for anyone who has been kind of maintaining or deploying resources on scale in Azure using infrastructure as code. And that's where what happens is that you come across approaches uh, where you come across an approach where okay, and you what you do is you create some kind of template, or you can call it module, and then different teams can refer it to deploy things in Azure. So they refer it from here and they deploy it to Azure for their own products, something like that. But the problem is that this module is like, either you develop internally and you maintain it, and again you are not sure if you are still following all the well architected framework, or the different best practices from Microsoft. And again, you will always end up doing more stuff on this level from your platform team or from your DevOps team or whatever you can call it. But someone has to kind of keep visiting the best practices of different resources, keep updating it, and then keep enforcing the different application teams to use it and then maintain it. But what Microsoft has done now, that based on their experience with different customers, different deployments, different kind of experiences, they came up with the approach where they will maintain this module, and that's what they call it. Oops, Azure Verified Module. And now you can refer this module in your infrastructure as code, and you can use them. and then you can be sure that this will be always maintained by Microsoft. So Microsoft will have a framework which has someone from Microsoft, one of the employees from Microsoft will be having ownership of this module. So you will be sure that you will be supported. They have support metrics. We will go through the documentation, and then we will see what are the kind of approaches they are following to make sure that you can trust this particular Azure Verified module to be updated, to be kind of most up to date, to have be able to create pull requests and fixing them or contributing to them. So those kind of things Microsoft will ensure that. So you have the trust there. So you don't really have to kind of start from the scratch. First thing. The second thing is that reusability aspect. So you can within organization or across organizations, people can use these modules for their use case. And these modules are very much, at least for now, I mean, they are just beginning. There are not many modules as of now, but yeah, there are. They will try, or they will try to create these modules in most parameterized ways so that it can fit into most of the use cases. Having said that, you might come across some use cases where you will have to start developing from scratch as well, because there is no such module on the Azure Verified module repository. And I mean, you will develop that module, and maybe if that module is something that makes sense for many of the people in the community, you might end up contributing that to the Azure Verified module, and that is possible. So you can also develop your own Azure Verified module. Yes, there is a framework for it. You can develop it, you can contribute it, you can publish it. But yes, I mean, there is a framework. It's not like anyone can publish it, because it has to be maintained by Microsoft. So there has to be a process, a review kind of thing, proposal kind of thing. So those things are there. We will get into those stuff. So let's just go back and go to the documentation of Azure Verified module. So Azure Verified module, as you can see, has been kind of when they when you look at Azure Verified module, the first thing you need to see is that, because we are talking about Azure, uh, everything will be happening through the Azure Resource Manager API. Now, right now, we have like these two domain-specific languages to interact with. One is Bicep, another is Terraform. So you have modules in Bicep. So if you are working in Bicep, Azure Bicep, you can use Azure Verified module. Similarly, if you are working with Terraform in terms of your infrastructure as code implementation tool, you can use that. And of course, they have kind of plan to have other tools as well here. But yes, right now, these are the two tools which are available for using Azure Verified module. Uh, of course, because Bicep is different than Terraform, there might be slight difference in using them. There might be differences how you use them, but more or less the architectural or the structure of Azure Verified module remains same across these two tools at this moment. When we talk about Azure, I mean Azure Verified module, you will come across two types of module, and actually three types of module. But let's discuss about two types of module for the time being, and then we will talk about third types in a bit. So the first type is resource module, and the second type is pattern. So what is pattern? So first, let's talk about resource module. As the name suggests, resource modules are modules defined for a particular type of resource. So for example, VNet. So you want to deploy VNet. Microsoft has developed a VNet resource module that has been defined in accordance to the well architected framework. So what are the best practices for when you are creating a VNet? You should have NSG rules. You should have subnets. How you should define those subnets. So such kind of resource module. So same way you have virtual machine. You have if you create a virtual machine, what kind of disk you should use, what kind of encryption should be enabled on a virtual machine. So those things which, if you want to deploy those resources, you have to define yourself, and you can define them based on the properties or the configuration of that resource, but and that might not be uh, in accordance to the well, architecture framework. So it might not be very much optimized for the security point of view. It might not be very much optimized from the availability point of view. So those things will be defined in resource module by default. But having said that, there will be some resources which are kind of a resource which might need some additional resource to be created, and that part is sometimes becomes a kind of a tricky situation. So, for example, if you are deploying a application gateway, um, by default, you should have a kind of a diagnostic setting in such a way that you can collect your logs in a log analytics workspace. Then again, so when you are deploying an application gateway, you are also supposed to have a log analytics workspace so that you can configure the logs, diagnostic settings, and things like that. But when you go about that, you can see that there is an additional cost associated with the additional resource that's supposed to be available to make sure that you are deploying a resource in a in a very secure or optimized way. In that cases, Azure Verified Module gives you a little bit of flexibility as well, where you can define what you want, what you don't want, and we will see into that in a bit how exactly this happens. Uh, Resource module or pattern. So pattern is like when you let's go back to our session on. So let me just back to our discussion on the. Okay. So as we discussed, so when you are talking about so when you talk about some kind of a stack. So, for example, you have virtual machine three-tier architecture, or you can have a container apps environment, or you can have a kind of a function app for API, or so you have a kind of a stack that you want to deploy, and those stack are something which are very common. So if you are working with the Azure, you must know something called architecture center. So when you go to architecture center, go back here and Azure. So if you go here, you will find a lot of so for example, the first thing is there is that cross-tenant secure access web app, or you have like you can select here like for example databases. So you have different architecture for databases. Now these are something called stacks. You can think of it from the Azure Verified Module point of view, that you have a couple of resources defined together to solve a particular architecture, and that's what this pattern is all about. So you will have some common pattern that you need. So for example, here we have AKS landing zone, AVD landing zone. So landing zone is also a kind of a pattern that you have. Similarly, you will have different kind of architecture pattern where you have a set of virtual machine connected with a gateway, application gateway or load balancer or front door or something like that. And then you kind of deploy a particular type of architecture or a particular type of application on that particular pattern. So those pattern modules are set of resource module essentially. So resource module is like specific resources, but you know that when you are trying to host an application on Azure, you just can't have something by using one module. I mean one resource. You will have set of resources connected with each other in a particular way so that they can solve the problem, overall problem. So that is what the pattern module helps with. And the same thing you can see. So for example, here we have what resource module. Resource module is like, different resources. uh, they are configured in a way that comply with the kind of well architected framework. That's what the resource module is. Pattern is like, when deploy multiple resources, usually using resource module. So you combine different resource modules together, and then you deploy a stack of resources in a particular way, so that people can use a particular architecture following the well architected framework best practices. There is third another module which is in a very beginning phase right now, which is utility module. So we don't really have so many utility modules, but utility modules will be the modules which are kind of a function or a routine, or I mean, as it says, it's not necessarily deploy a resource, but it try to connect with a service, and then try to figure out some information, and based on that information, your deployment proceeds. I mean, it can be anything. It can be connecting to an API, figure out what is the value of the API, and then accordingly get that value and then put it into your deployment in a particular way, logical way, whatever. I mean, it's just a kind of a utility function that you can have. But again, this is not really right now very functional. It is still draft model. But yes, we have couple of resource module, we have couple of pattern modules available, and that you can see in the module index. So the same documentation, I'm just having different tabs here. So in the module index, you can see that we have two different types, bicep and terraform, and we have like these many modules published for bicep. Similarly for terraform, we have these many proposals for terraform, these many proposals for bicep. And in terms of resource module, we have these many, pattern modules, these many, and then we have utility, which is still like proposal. We don't have any published module for utility. But in and all, you have like these many resource module, these many resource module in Terraform, these many resource module in Bicep, including both published and in draft or in proposal. So this is the way I mean, and that's say in the same way we have like these many published module for pattern and these many published module for pattern in Terraform. So these are the kind of modules modules that we have available, and you can see how many modules we have. For example, for Terraform, if you go ahead, you can see that these many modules are available for different kind of container app managed environment, role assignment, based on your resource or based on your kind of architecture that you want to deploy. We will deploy a kind of a pattern module for demo, but in a bit. So let me go to my Visual Studio, and so this, and we have this GitHub runner, and that GitHub runner, we have a Terraform file which has GitHub runners, and the GitHub runner module is using one of the pattern module from here, AVM, PTN, CI/CD. So if we go to the link, this is the pattern module we have from Terraform, and this is Azure Verified Module for running Azure DevOps agents or GitHub runners. So using this pattern module, you can deploy GitHub runners or Azure DevOps agents. I mean, the on-prem um, DevOps agent or on-prem GitHub runners, commonly known as private runners or private agents, or on-prem agents or on-prem runners. So basically, both Azure DevOps and GitHub provides you hosted runners or hosted agents from Microsoft and GitHub respectively. But you need to pay for it, and they are they are highly available, but you need to pay for the runs. Yes, it is they are available for some limited amount of time for free accounts, and of course if you have a paid account, you have like pay as you go model, kind of that plan, whatever plan that you have. But essentially there is a payment associated with it. But if you have a requirement of running your CI/CD pipeline on an agent which you can control, that's where this Azure DevOps agents comes into picture. So there you deploy these agents on your infrastructure in Azure or in any other cloud or on-prem, and then you don't really have to pay to Azure DevOps or GitHub for running your pipelines on those agents. But when you deploy these agents, you need to pay for it. You need to pay for it wherever you are hosting them. So, for example, if you are hosting them in Azure, you need to pay for the consumption that the agents is going through. So agents are necessarily either container agents or virtual machines. And based on what you are using, what service you are using, you may have to plan the kind of payment for it. So what we are going to do is we are going to use this module, this Azure Verified module, to deploy our GitHub Runner. Uh, we are using GitHub to deploy the GitHub Runner. You can use Azure DevOps as well, and we will soon get into the documentation of it to figure out what's happening. But before we do, let me just go ahead and try to see what's happening here. See uh, here we have main. So I'll say Terraform plan. So I'm just going to figure out what's happening, what will happen if we just run the Terraform apply for this particular um, Terraform configuration. And as you can see, fresh, and we have this few variables here. One variable for GitHub path, one variable for GitHub organization number name, and then repo name, and that is defined here in this variable. So we have this path token, we have this organization name, we have this repository name. So let's go back and go to GitHub. We'll go to architecting. Then here, if we setting runners, we don't have any runner here on this repository as of now. So let's go back and run this. And actually, if you see in this here, if you look at it, see the resource group name, and here the resource group name will be this. So this is the resource group name where this whole thing will be deployed. And what it's doing is here, it's going to deploy a couple of resources. As you can see, there are so many resources are getting deployed. So one is like container app environment, then container apps, then container registry, then virtual network link, have virtual network, then you have telemetry, you have container image build, job, then you have different kind of tasks for registry. So those things are getting deployed, and these are all defined within this module. So we don't have to figure out what's happening with the container apps, how this is being deployed. And you can imagine if you have to define all these Terraform yourself, you have to do a lot of things. But however, Microsoft has developed it, they have published it, and they are making sure it is maintained, and you just have to use it. But having said that, you just don't have to depend on how they are deploying, for example, virtual network. For example, they have a container registry, and we'll talk about in a bit. So first, let's go ahead and deploy it. So before that, let me open portal. Yes. All right. So we have this here, and if you go to the resource group, And if don't have anything like Terraform Runner, as you can. So the resource group name was RGISC Runner. So we don't have anything like that. Search it as it is. We don't have any. Let's go ahead and deploy this. It will take some time. Apply, and it will take some time to deploy all these resources because as you can see there are a lot of resources that are being deployed. Yes, and while it's working on deploying all these resources, let me go back and go to the repository of the platform. So this is where it has been maintained. You can contribute to it. You can create a pull request by your contribution, or you can create issues as well. But we'll look at something else here. So right now we just deployed for GitHub, but you can also deploy it for Azure DevOps. All you have to do is you have to change this to version control system, and then appropriately you will change the organization name and your agent pool where this agent will be deployed. You need to define your address space. Those things are there, of course. But this is not just the thing because Azure Verified Module will be. It's not that every organization will would need to would need to deploy a virtual network. They might already have a virtual network where they want to deploy the agent or the runner. They might have a they might already have a container app environment, or they might already have a container registry where they which they want to reuse. So essentially you don't really want to deploy these resources again and again. You might have a central virtual network or a virtual network dedicated for these tasks, pipelines, or maybe a virtual network for application team or whatever. I mean, for whatever reason, if you have those things, then you know you still have kind of inputs with using which you can define. So for example, you have like container app environment. Yeah, so you have like container app environment creation enabled. So if you by default is true, so that means it will create a container app environment. Yeah, right now it's work. And if we go to the portal, still doing running. And as you can see a lot of resources are being created. You have like ACR, you have container environment, and done. And yeah, it's running the container app, which is responsible for running the runner. So let's wait for this to finish. As far as resources are concerned, they are deployed. So as you can see, there are many resources that has been created, and in your organization, you might not want to create a container registry. So for example, container registry is something that you don't want to just create for this particular use case. You might have already a container registry that you want to reuse, or you might not want to create a container app environment itself. You already have a container app environment where all your applications are running, and your CI/CD pipeline runners are just another application or another workload that has to be there in the container environment itself. Similarly, you have like virtual network, for example. So you might not want to create a virtual network dedicated for this particular use case. You might already have a virtual network where you want to deploy all these resources. So what you can do here is that if you go to the registry, you have different options. So for example, if you want to have container app environment created, similarly you have like for example, So for example, you have subnet ID. So if you say virtual network creation enabled to false, that means you don't want to create virtual network. So if you set this particular attribute to false, then it means that you don't want a virtual network to be created. And in that case, you have to mention container app subnet ID, so that whichever the virtual network is, whichever the subnet is, it will try to create the container app there in that subnet. Similarly, you have all these different parameters that you can use to deploy your uh, this stack. So what we mean to show here is, so you have these many different uh, attributes that you can define uh, for your deployment using Azure Verified Module based on, so these many customization you can do. So for example, you already have a log analytics workspace, or you want to create a log analytics workspace. For example, as you can see, log analytics workspace creation enabled is another thing where you can say false. By default, it is true. So when it is true, it will create a workspace, but if it is false, then it will not create a workspace, but it will expect you to provide this workspace ID. So this is the way you can define behavior of different resource actually. So resource modules are being used behind the scene. So it is one of the example of pattern module. So here we have a pattern of container apps environment for deploying GitHub Runners. Similarly, it can be Azure DevOps agent as well. And then you have this pattern, but at the same time, this pattern is like highly customizable based on how your organization want to use. They might want to create all the resources just like we did now, or they might want to kind of customize certain things and do not want to customize certain things. So this is the way you can use Azure Verified Module. Let me go and, yeah, like still running, still creating. Should be done in a bit, but check. Still running. So this is the way you can use Azure Verified Module. Now, this Azure Verified Module has a couple of things to uh, understand how this is followed. So, for example, they have a support framework from Microsoft, and they want to communicate to us that this will be maintained proactively. So you can raise a ticket with Microsoft if you are using it in production and you have issues. You can create issues in GitHub. You can create issues or support ticket, and Microsoft will have someone to help you there. Uh, they have a proper SLA kind of a framework where they will make sure that you get the required support uh, in time. Still, it is in a very very beginning phase, but Microsoft has a quite a good commitment on this particular initiative, where they want to support us to use these modules to kind of deploy resources in a most standard way. At the same time, do not have to develop or kind of reinvent the whole thing again and again in different approaches or in a different variations. But however, instead of that, you use these modules, and when the modules do not have the scenario, you kind of contribute to these modules, and there is a kind of a contribution Q&A that you can go through how you can actually contribute to either update a module, or you can create your own proposal for a new module. So this is very much open source initiative where you can kind of contribute to it. And as we have already discussed, these many resources that we have right now, but it's really kind of I would say very easy to do, very easy to use, and they are pretty much standard the way they have been defined, these modules. and they have a module specification as well. So different tools like Bicep has its own specification, Terraform has its own specification, but there are some shared specification. But so this is important for people who wants to see how things are working and how they have to be named, what are the different standard they are following to make sure that this Azure Verified module is defined in a very standard way. So still kind of running, yeah, because check, no, it will not appear here unless work. Wait. Hmm. Okay, so I will be back after, once it is done. I'll rewind. I'll just skip this part and then come back here once it is done. All right, so it's done. Now let's go back here. Uh, Stop. Okay, do this way. I do. Waiting. Yeah. Will, so because it is container apps, it will run the container app, very real time. So when you have a request, it will create a container for you, and in the same way, soon start. Yeah, you can see this runner has been deployed on your container app. So in this way, you are just paying for the containers when you have a pipeline for it. So it's very cost effective. And that way, once done. And right now, it's a very simple one-liner script here, but you can want. But essentially, it is running on your runner. So we just deployed a runner in a private container app environment. Of course, you can customize it the way you want, but this is pretty much you kind of use Azure Verified Module to deploy a container app environment in Azure using Azure Verified Module, of course, that deploys a runner infrastructure for GitHub. So this is pretty much I wanted to share with you. Thanks for watching.